Good afternoon, and welcome to the Culinary Scene Kitchen at Roth Living. My name is Ben Davis. I am executive chef here at the Roth Living showroom in Denver, Colorado, welcoming you to this installment of an ownership experience covering Wolf convection wall and range ovens. So if you own an M series, an E series, a dual fuel range, or an induction range, this is the place to be to learn about the use and care of that particular appliance. So we're so glad that you're able to join us on this Friday afternoon. We apologize for having to delay for a week, but we had some issues earlier with some of our staff, so we couldn't get it to you on the day we appointed. So we're so glad that you could make it with us today to cover these appliances. Just a few points before we get started. First and foremost, the link that brought you to today's YouTube live streamed event will also take you back to a recorded version in the future. So should you need to refresh your memory on something or catch up on one of the points that is going to be covered in today's class, just use the same link that you used today to come to today's live stream event to attend a recorded version of today's session. So just keep that handy if you need it in the future. Second, and I think this is really the most important thing, should you have a question about the use and care of your appliances that you would like to ask during today's session, you'll need to create an account there on YouTube if you haven't already. But if you have that account, you'll be able to type a question into the chat feature at the bottom of the page, and that will allow us to answer that question in the coverage of today's event. So just type it in. Denver, who is behind the screen today, will relay that question out to me, and we'll get it answered for you as quickly as possible. It's much faster than waiting, typing a comment, and then having us to go back and find it and then write a reply. So if you can do that, make an account, and then just type in the question that you have regarding your appliance. And then last but not least, you'll see some links in the description of today's event on that YouTube screen. There should be 3 links. Those links will all take you to some printed documents that you're able to download, or you can print them if you'd like to, but they're there. I'm going to reference those in just a few minutes, but just check those links out. I think you'll find them very helpful in the use and care of not just your Wolf oven, but also your Sub-Zero. Maybe you have a Cove dishwasher, some other Wolf appliances. Maybe it's a cooktop, maybe it's a convection steam oven. Any of those are going to be covered in one of those documents. So if you need those, check those links out in the description so you can download or print those at your leisure, right? You won't need to do it for today's event, but I would heartily recommend that you save it to your computer so you can refer to it in the future. All right, so today, all about ovens, all about how to use those ovens. Once we're done talking about the use of those ovens and we go through that, we'll talk about taking care of that oven, the cleaning, whether you're using the self-cleaning cycle in the oven, or perhaps you need to do some spot cleaning or some general just maintenance on the oven to keep it looking fantastic. We'll cover that as well at the end. So if that's what you're really here for, to learn about cleaning, you might have to wait until the end, but I guarantee you we'll get to it back at the end of today's session so you can take some notes on that, all right? So first and foremost, we want to talk about how these ovens go together. I want everybody to understand, very important, that whichever oven you own, whether it be a wall oven or a range oven, whether it's dual fuel or induction, whether it's an E or an M series oven, they are constructed in very similar ways. The way that they operate is exactly the same, so you can actually just translate all the way across. And there's the clarion call from my E series behind me telling me that what I'm cooking is done. So let's just have a look at this. My probe just reached its alert temperature, and it tells me that what I've prepared in the oven has just reached that exact temperature, and here it is. We used our gourmet setting, and we're going to certainly talk about that mode as we get to that, right? So we want to talk about that gourmet. We used the gourmet setting to prepare a really, really nice meatloaf. So here it is. I've got my probe. You can see that I've got it inserted in the center there. Just reached its alert temperature using the gourmet setting. So we want to take that out, get that out of the way. And we're just going to set this aside to rest for a bit. But that gourmet feature is something that's on all the ovens. So as I was saying before, remember, if you have E series, M series, dual fuel, induction, it doesn't matter. Any of those wall ovens or range ovens we're talking about the same functionality in all of them, right? Different ways to talk to it, a different look, different placement of the ovens, but when we talk about how the oven operates, they are the same. So it makes it very easy. You don't have to differentiate between a dual fuel and an M series, an E series and an induction range. You don't have to differentiate between those ovens. We can basically talk about all of them together and not have to split. So let's talk about how these ovens go together, because I think that's really important to start there and understand how they go, because it's the heat and how the heat is produced and whether or not you are utilizing the convection system that create those different cooking modes. And you all know what those cooking modes are because you have 10 of them, and you may have looked at your oven and said, okay, I understand kind of bake, I think I know what bake means. I don't really like to use convection because I've had bad experience with it, but I kind of understand convection. Then there's all these other ones. Well, we want to go through and explain exactly how the oven is operating, so then we can understand how the modes operate. And when we know how the modes operate, we can know the best way to use our oven for different preparations. And one of those documents that you are going to be able to download is what I call the Wolf Convection Oven Mode Guide. And it's right here. You can download it. It lists all the modes in your oven right down the side here, right? So everything from bake to convection, convection roast, proof, warm, all of them right there. And then it also tells you right here, where is the heat coming from? Which elements are engaged to heat the oven for that particular mode, and to what percentage is the heat coming from the bottom, the top, the back, whatever it might be. Obviously, a convection mode is going to involve the fans, and we'll get into that. But then in this last column, what you see there is the best use for that particular mode, because I think we can probably all agree that even though we're using the same appliance, right, baking chocolate chip cookies and roasting a turkey or a prime rib, they use the same appliance, but they're very different things, right? They're going to take different amounts of time. They're going to require a different finished product, whether it's, the perfectly golden brown exterior on a turkey or a perfectly baked cookie with just enough chew in the middle that, makes your kids happy or your spouse happy. So that's really important to understand that these modes are dialed in for a particular type of cooking, right? Because they aren't all the same. We don't want you just to use Bake 350 for absolutely everything. So I would recommend you download this mode guide. You can use it as a cheat sheet in the future if you've forgotten what the best use for roast is or the best use for convection roast is. Now you have a little cheat sheet here to remember that by. So let's talk about how this oven goes together. So remember, all ovens same, right? So when we open the oven door and we look inside, we now know that there are 4 heating elements in your oven. The one underneath the floor, the one we've had on every oven we've pretty much ever owned, whether it was gas or electric, it doesn't matter. We all had that big element underneath the floor, commonly known as the baking element, the primary element. In your Wolf oven, it is the most powerful element in your arsenal, right? When you're going to engage that big element down there, you've got a lot of heat, a lot of power that you're working with. What that means is you have to remember nothing, and I mean nothing, ever goes on the floor of your oven. That starts at aluminum foil and goes all the way to your grandmother's cast iron Dutch oven that maybe was given to you. You don't want to put anything on the bottom of the oven, on the floor of the oven, because that's going to cause the oven to discolor, to become disfigured. It's going to ruin it. It's not covered by your warranty. None of that. And you'll never get it clean, right? You put that aluminum foil down there, it's going to cook itself to the metal. You'll never get it off. So don't. Nothing on the floor. If you need to keep something clean, we'll talk about that here in a few minutes. So that's your big element down here, the baking element, right? The other element that we've got in every other oven we've ever owned is our broiler element up here in the ceiling, obviously recessed just a little bit. That broiler element, right, we use it obviously extensively or exclusively when we're using the broil mode, right, when we're cooking a piece of fish or a nice chicken cutlet, something like that under the broiler. But we have to remember that sometimes the broiler mode is engaged when we are not broiling, when we're doing some of the roasting modes. We want to be aware of that so we don't put anything too close to the top of the oven and we burn it, right, because it's too close to the broiler. So just understand that there are certain modes, and again, it's listed here on that guide, when the broiler is engaged to a certain percentage, and we don't want to, ruin something because we put it too close. The other 2 elements are the ones you can't see. They're behind the 2 convection fans, which are located behind the back wall each one of those elements is half the amount of power that you get from underneath the floor. So obviously when we put them together, we have the same amount of power that we can bring from the bottom of the oven. We can now bring it from the back of the oven, and we can drive that heat. We can push that heat with our convection system so that we're circulating that same amount of power and same amount of heat throughout the oven using our programmed convection modes so that we get really good air circulation. So again, remember those two fans back there and the two elements around them. When we're using convection, that's where most of the heat is going to be coming from all the time. So that's really a great thing to know when you're talking about using the convection modes in your oven. Now, like all Wolf ovens, our rack positions are numbered from bottom to top. Obviously, very important. Rack position is so critical to knowing where's the ideal spot to do a single rack of cookies, or perhaps 3 trays of lasagna, whatever it might be. We want to know which rack position is ideal, right? Always numbered from bottom to top, so 1 will always be the lowest, 6 will always be the highest. So you can easily divide the oven into 3 separate thirds, low, middle, and upper, and so you can always kind of generalize if you need to. Best position is going to be the middle third, maybe it's upper middle or lower upper. All of those things you can move in there to get ideal rack positions depending on what it is you're cooking. Now, speaking of racks, you have 2 types of racks in your oven. The one that you are probably most familiar with is the one that we get in almost every oven we've ever had. Just has these simple little steel balls at the back, which are known as detents. They keep the oven rack stable. When we pull it out, we can slide it out to either the first or second one and still have very good stability with our oven rack. So we can just place this in any position we like very easily by just simply sliding those 2 guides on, and then it's in, so you can stop first or second. Just remember that this rack in either position can support up to 50 pounds of weight before we have any risk of collapse at all, right? So that's a very easy rack. But the other 2 racks, our full extension glide rack, can be a little more problematic when we want to replace or remove them. We want to maybe swap rack position, so we need to know how to easily do that. So first thing I want you to do when you're ready to move or remove a rack is I want you to slide it all the way out so it stops at the end of its glides, just like that. And then I want you to grip it right at the back of the rack and lift it up and then just slide it out. If this one won't, and this one doesn't want to slide out at all. Well, let's do the bottom one. So we'll slide that out, lift it up, and slide out. Now here's where people get a problem. They try to place the rack back in the oven when it's still extended. I want you, first thing to do is close it down, and then I want you to grip it right by this small L-shaped tab at the front of the rack. Just hold it right there. This obviously is still hot, but you want to hold it so it can't open or close. It'll stay nice and shut. And all you're going to do is align that small guide on the bottom of the rack onto whichever rack position you desire to place the rack in. In this case, I'm going to put it in rack position number 4. So I've just tipped it up just a little bit, put it onto rack position 4, slide it in. It's going to feel a little bit loose. That's okay. Pick up the nose, slide it in, and now it's locked in place. Not going to slide out, not going to get out of position. And this will also support up to 50 pounds, just like your other style rack. So now you have that rack. You can go in any rack position you like, right? So we have 6 positions. So a lot of people like to put them in 1, 3, and 5. Maybe it's 2, 4, or 6, whichever you'd like, but you just rearrange depending on what it is you're going to cook, how deep the pan might be, all of that good stuff. So we get that just nicely set, just like that. All right. Now we know the inside of the oven. We know how it goes together, right? So how do we talk to our ovens? We all have different, if we have a different oven, we have a different interface. This is an E-series double wall oven. Talking to that, it's very easy. We simply press over here on the left or the left-hand side of the panel. We have our controls, which controls both the upper and lower ovens, right? So if I want to turn my upper oven on, I simply press that. Now I'm going to select my cooking mode, whatever mode I'm going to choose to cook in, right? Those are all listed over here, and then you just press on that button. In this case, I'm going to use the convection mode. So upper is on, I'm gonna touch convection, right? Now, should I wanna change the temperature in this oven, I simply select it over here on the right side of the panel by going 3, 6, 5 for 365, and then start enter, right? So now my oven is going into preheat mode. Remember that in any mode, whatever mode you are going to use in your oven and you are preheating, the oven convection system will be operating at that point. We will use the convection fans to circulate the air more efficiently to preheat your oven as quickly as possible. You should expect a preheat time of about 12 to 15 minutes when you're trying to achieve 350 degrees Fahrenheit. That's about the average for any type of oven. Going to be 12 to 15 minutes. However, when we get to temperatures in excess of 425 degrees, when we're getting way up there into the very upper edge of what our oven can do, up into that 500 degree range, we want to know that it will take a significantly longer time to preheat the oven because of the nature of the way that a Wolf oven preheats. When we preheat, we are not simply preheating the air temperature in the oven cavity, we're actually preheating the temperature of the walls that surround the interior of the oven, so that when we have those walls to that preheated temperature, the radiant heat that comes off gives us a very even, stable environment in which to bake or roast or whatever we might be doing in our oven. So to get the walls to those very high temperatures is going to be an extended period of time. This is just something you're going to want to plan for if you're going to use the oven at a very high temperature. It will take a fairly long time to preheat, upwards sometimes of 45 minutes, particularly if you're using a stone mode and you have a bake stone in place. And we'll talk about the accessory in just a few minutes. But when we talk about using that stone, that again slows the preheating process, because at most cases when we're using a bake stone, we're heating the oven to at least 450, if not a greater a temperature, and so therefore it does take a long time to preheat the oven. So just build that into your brain so that when you're going to hit those high temperatures, make sure you're giving yourself enough time to preheat the oven. The other thing that you'll realize is that once you've preheated the oven to a very high temperature like that, and then you've turned it off and you've walked away, that oven stays warm for a very long time. So don't get worried if you're walking past the oven, it's an hour after you've turned it off and it still feels warm to the touch. That's because those walls do take a while to cool down, right? So don't be worried, right? The oven is just naturally going to take a little bit of time to cool off, right? Okay, so we understand that. We're in preheat mode for convection here. Convection is just one of those 10 modes that you have in your oven. You have essentially 10 different ways that you can cook, right? And those 10 different ways are easily divided into what I like to call still modes and convection modes. A still mode, right, is a mode when we're cooking in the oven where the fan system is not engaged during the cooking process. In other words, once the oven is preheated, the fans will never engage again, and neither will the two heating elements that surround those fans provide any of the heat in the oven. The heat is actually just coming from either the upper and lower elements, and it's basically doing what the heat wants to do. If you think about a still mode, it's just allowing the heat to naturally move, naturally rise in the oven cavity. We're not telling it how we want to move, we're allowing it to do its own thing. This is obviously going to be very beneficial for many different processes, and we want to understand that those still modes, right, just because they're not using the full capability of the convection system, aren't really well suited for many, many, many preparations. And many times convection isn't the best answer for a certain type of preparation. So we want to be sure that we're using everything. We're not just kind of defaulting to a single mode. We want to use them all. So still modes in your oven, again, no convection during the cooking process. Those modes would be bake and roast. Stone is a still mode, as is proof and warm, right? All of those modes do not utilize the convection system with the heating elements to heat the oven and move the air. Those are still modes. Your convection modes, conversely, right, always have fan activity during the cooking process, and the elements that surround those cooking fans or surround the convection fans are actually heating the oven. So that a lot of that heat is being driven from behind the back wall. This obviously is very important when we talk about utilizing the entire oven cavity, which was the point of convection in the first place, was to allow you as your home chef to utilize the entire oven cavity without having to do the whole, tango thing where you take the tray and you move it from top to bottom and you spin it around and all of those things, right? So that's one of the great things about Wolf convection, is that it really does allow you to do a lot of really great things utilizing convection mode that you might not ever attempt were you not having a convection system as sophisticated as the Wolf system. And one of the unique things about Wolf convection is that because of the two fans and because of the sort of our compulsion to test and make sure that we're giving you the most even cooking, baking environment as possible, right? We've created an algorithm when using this convection mode that creates air movement in the oven cavity, which is literally constant. There is never a moment during a convection cycle, right, in a convection mode, where the air is not moving, and it's moving the way we want it to move. It's moving that air in so many different patterns that there can really never be a hot or a cold spot created, because the air is constantly circulating in a different way, and therefore we don't have a hot spot in the front left and a cold spot in the back right. You're always going to get very even. So just know that with convection, right, you're going to have constant air movement, and convection is going to allow you to bake very, very confidently on more than one rack. In fact, if there's a rule that we're going to talk about today, is going to be that when you're going to bake or roast or anything on multiple levels, you have to use convection. That's pretty much, just put that in the bank, and you never forget it. If you're going to cook on multiple racks, you've got to use convection, period, end of story, right? So in this case, we're going to actually cook two things using convection that maybe most people wouldn't put into the oven. One of those would be a tray of beautiful smoky bacon, has a lot of wonderful flavors, aromas going on, and right next to it in the oven, we're going to put a tray of chocolate chip cookies. Now you're thinking to yourself maybe, well, wait a minute, how are the cookies not going to taste like the bacon, right? Isn't that going to be sort of a flavor that's going to transfer over? Normally, you might not do this because you would be afraid of that, or maybe it's two things that you would definitely not put into the oven together, like say, a side of beautiful fresh salmon and an apple tart, right? You wouldn't put those into the oven because that great fear that the fish is going to somehow, imbibe the tart with the flavor of the fish. We don't want that. But as I said before, because the convection system in the Wolf oven is constantly moving the air, remember the air is never still for 1 second, that flavor can't settle from one to the other. So two items that can tolerate the same amount of heat can go into the oven simultaneously. They may not cook in the same amount of time, but you're never going to have to worry about the flavor of this lending itself to this. So they can go in simultaneously. So we've reached our preheat temperature here. You saw how quick that was. So we're going to take our tray of cookies. We're going to place it right here on the bottom rack, and we're going to take our bacon and we're going to place it up here on the top rack. Now, if you need to set a timer, you have two independent timers on your oven, right? They're just noted here in the bottom corner of the touch screen, and you would simply touch that timer, right? A screen will pop up, and then if you can just set a time, you can just set, say, 14 minutes right there and touch enter, and now you have a timer independently. I'm really pretty much timing the cookies more than anything else. The bacon, I'm going to go mostly on the look test to see how that's working. So now we can understand a little bit about convection. I just want to mention a few things about convection and using convection. Just if you live here in Colorado, or perhaps you're in some of the higher elevations in Utah, Idaho, Montana, even parts of Wyoming and stuff like that, when you're up at a fairly high elevation, I want to kind of address a couple things that people that may hear about convection, and we want to address that for those of us who cook at altitude. The first thing we want to know about convection is your food is going to cook faster. So anytime you're using a convection mode in the oven, you want to set your timer for probably 20% faster than you would do it, set the timer if you were just baking in a still oven, okay? Second thing you want to remember is that the food is going to brown more evenly and more completely, much faster. So even though sometimes the food has browned a little bit, you want to still cook to that time, that reduced time, because that extra browning is just encouraged by the circulation of the air and the efficiency of the oven. And the other one I want to mention is that a lot of people will tell you that when you use convection, you should naturally lower the temperature, again, because your oven is more efficient, by up to 25 degrees. Some people call it the 25-25 rule, which is 25% faster and 25% lower temperature. I think that's great if you live in Biloxi or you live perhaps in Philadelphia. But for those of us who live up here at 5,000 or 6,000 feet above sea level, altitude can really play havoc with our baked goods, particularly if we lower a temperature too far down and we don't get the proper structure set in the middle of our baked good. So my recommendation for just about anybody baking at altitude is that even when you use convection, you should never lower the temperature from what the recipe originally called for, right? Just use that same temperature, bake at that temperature, check it early, remember it will brown a little bit quicker, but that's a really good thing to remember because you don't want your baked goods to fail because you thought that the oven was going to compensate for the altitude. It can't do that. The oven can't compensate for atmospheric pressure. There's just no way to do that. The only thing that can do that is a pressure cooker, and that's obviously not what this is. So let's not adjust that in that way. All right. So again, convection, we use it when we're baking on multiple racks. We're always using it for that. When we're cooking or baking, and we want to put two items in simultaneously and not have flavor transfer from one to the other, then we're definitely using convection because that's going to be really, really a great advantage if you're trying to save a little time, right? You don't want to wait for one item to finish before you insert the other one into the oven. So that's one of the great things about using that Wolf convection system in your oven, right? And having that heat coming entirely from the back wall. Because remember that within our convection system, this lower element, the one under the floor, and the broiler, they're completely off. All the heat's coming from behind the back wall. You never have to worry about where you place on a rack. It can be 1, 3, 5, 2, 4, 6, 2, 4, 5. It doesn't matter. You place whatever works for you. Get that circulation of air going. It's going to make your food cook really evenly, really completely. All right? So I'm starting with convection because I know a lot of people they get a little confused about using convection. They want to know when is the best time, when's not the best time to use it, right? Convection, again, because it's so efficient, for certain items, it's not the best way to cook something. A great example might be this granola that we made earlier today, right? The granola needs to cook slowly and evenly so it gets nice and crisp and uniformly brown. The convection might cook it too fast. When you've got something in the oven, for almost 2.5 hours, right, to slowly bake it, to slowly crisp it, right, you want that slow, steady, even cooking, right? Convection may not be the best way for that. In fact, I use just a regular bake mode for this because I could keep it nice and even and nice and consistent and gentle and just let it cook very, very evenly so I can just stir it periodically. That's a great way to cook it. So I wanted to just kind of make sure that we start with convection so we really understand it. So let's pop over to another oven and have a look at what else we can do using the convection system in the oven. And that's the other convection mode that I think you're really going to like, which is called convection roast, right? Convection roast is that mode that really accelerates the way your oven's cooking. And how it does that is by obviously using the convection system in a way that pushes the air in a very consistent pattern across the food that you're cooking, right? But it also engages the broiler. 25% of the heat coming in convection roast is being generated by the broiler. So you get that extra top heat, that extra browning that's happening because of the broiler. But what's really speeding up the system is that convection system being kind of evenly distributing the heat. So using convection roast is great when you want to do something that requires either a temperature probe or you want it to just look fantastic on the outside and like a turkey or maybe a prime rib, something along those lines, because again, you're getting the efficiency of convection and the extra heat from the broiler. So we're going to take some fresh potatoes with some rosemary and some onions, and we're going to pop it into our M Series contemporary style convection oven, which is the push to open variety. Just let that door drop down evenly. And we've got the oven nice and hot. And you see I've moved up pretty high. I'm up here in rack position number 5 because the closer I am to that broiler at that 25% of the heat is really going to help me brown and crisp those potatoes, right? So convection roast is just going to be one of those remarkable modes that you can use, that you can really take advantage of when you want to get something really crispy, really brown, right? So that, you know, that's really, when you think about it, that's what an air fryer is, right? It's a convection oven, right, that you roast on a rack, right? So if you want to use your oven like an air fryer, you can use the convection roast mode. You got a beautiful blue enameled broiler pan with your oven. Comes with a rack. All you need to do is put a little bit of foil in that blue pan, place the rack over top of it, lay whatever you want to air fry on top of that rack, right? Then you're going to convection roast at a nice high temperature. Maybe it's 450, maybe it's 475. But now you're circulating that air with the convection fan. You're using the broiler to give you extra heat. That's what an air fryer is. So now you can use your oven like an air fryer should you choose to. You don't need to put it on the countertop and take up that precious space. You can use the oven as an air fryer as well. And so that broiler pan comes standard with everybody's oven. That's what you use it for. Obviously, you can also use it for broiling, all that kind of stuff. We'll talk about broil here in a few minutes. But there's a few other accessories that I really wanted to point out and talk about the modes that are associated with these, right? One of those modes is the last of what we call a convection mode, and that would be the dehydrate mode. Now, this is probably a mode that most of you won't use that often unless you're into doing a lot of your own home preservation, or maybe you're a hunter, you're an avid sportsman, you're out there, you're making your own beef jerky, you're drying, you're smoking your own fish, you're dehydrating your own fish, things like that. You might want to use that dehydration mode. Best thing to remember about dehydration mode is you're going to need to have a rack similar to this. It doesn't have to be this exact rack, although this is a rack that you can purchase through Sub-Zero and Wolf. But you're going to lay the food right onto this rack, and then you'll place this rack on the oven rack. Then you'll set your oven into the dehydrate mode. The dehydrate mode is unique because it has a very limited temperature range. It only goes from 125 to 175 degrees. But the real difference between it and all the other convection modes is the fact that the fan, right, which normally stops when you open the door, now runs continuously. So there's a constant movement of air, where even if the oven door is completely open, that's going to blow that air. It's going to help dehydrate that food, remove that excess moisture, and really nicely, evenly dry the food out, preserving it and keeping it, in a really nice state. So that big difference again for dehydration is that you can't use it for cooking anything. It's just not hot enough, right? Unless you're going to cook something for a very long time. So you want to use that dehydration mode just for those drying and preserving techniques that you might use in the oven. Again, if you're going to be doing, like I said, jerkies or different dried vegetables and fruits, things like that, it's really a great system for that, right? So that dehydration mode, again, the last of the true convection modes that you can use in the oven, along with, again, convection roast and plain convection. So the other, and I think this is the accessory that everybody could be very interested in, and that is our baking stone, right? The Wolf Bake Stone, which is used exclusively when we use one of our still modes, which is the stone mode. Stone mode, again, is exclusively designed for use with an accessory. Now, does it have to be the Wolf Bake Stone? No, it could be any bake stone. I happen to like ours for a number of reasons. One is that it's a little thicker than the average bake stone, so it is more difficult to damage it because it's a little heavier duty. The other nice thing about the Wolf Bake Stone is that it's reversible, so if you get tired of looking at one side after you've used it a bunch of times, you just flip it over and look at the clean side. That's nice. It comes with this very nice rack that has these nice handles on the side, so it makes it easy to take it in and out of the oven, right? And it also comes with a peel, just like this, for removing pizza and other baked goods from the bake stone when you're utilizing the stone in your oven. So, as I said, there's a mode just for the bake stone, and you're only going to use stone mode when you have a stone in place. Few of the parameters for using the bake stone in the Wolf oven. One, the stone has to go into the oven when it is ice cold. it also has to go into rack position 1. Always the lowest most rack position. Not just on the floor, but as I said before, nothing on the floor, but just on rack position 1. Just set the stone in there. You're going to set the oven in stone mode, and then you're going to heat it up. And as I said before, it will slow the preheat cycle just a little bit. So again, take that into account. It's going to take a while for this stone to get hot. But as this stone gathers the heat from the oven, because remember, in stone mode, we're heating the oven, 60% is coming from below the floor, the other 40% from the broiler, but that 60% is engineered to heat this stone to very high temperature, so you replicate that hearth oven effect, right? So when you're cooking directly on this stone, you're getting 100% heat transfer from the preheated stone right up through whatever it is you're cooking, whether it's a pizza, it's a loaf of bread, it's pita bread, it's naan bread. Maybe you're going to throw some rolls on there. You're going to make a beautiful artisan loaf of sourdough using your stone to give you a little bit of extra oven spring. You can definitely do that, but the stone has to be hot and it has to be down there at the bottom of the oven, right? So once that stone is preheated, now you can just cook on it quick. We are able to cook a pizza, 4-6 minutes, right, at the max, and many times from a raw pizza dough straight through. Now, maybe you're buying one of those take and bake pizzas from a local pizzeria. You can bring it home and cook it right on the stone. I would just adjust your time. You might use the same temperature that the pizzeria calls for, but just remember, because that stone is so efficient, it's going to cook it a little bit faster, so you're going to expect it to cook very, very quickly. So again, stone mode is a still mode, right? It is a mode where we are not utilizing the elements around the fans. We are simply heating the oven from top and bottom and using the fans to actually just lightly circulate the air, but not actually heat the air and direct the movement, right? We're not actually saying, let's move the air in a very particular way. No, we're letting it kind of move naturally, so it helps replicate sort of what we would call that hearth oven effect when we're cooking in the oven. So again, the bake stone is something that I think you will find to be very useful. It's fun. You can have the kids do it. Everybody gets to kind of craft their own pizzas. It's a really good time to do that. And it just really takes your oven to a different level, because that stone is designed just for that, right? And just all those parameters make it so that it really functions beautifully in your electrically powered oven. You're getting the effect of having one of those beautiful wood-burning ovens, perhaps like you would in a pizzeria or something like that. And then one of the other accessories that you get, and everybody gets one of these, it comes with your oven, is your temperature probe, right? You all got a blue-clad temperature probe with your oven, right? This probe is obviously utilized not only for roasting meats and poultry and things like that, but you can also use it for ensuring that food that's being rewarmed is going to be perfectly heated. So I'm going to move over now to my other oven, right? And we're going to come back and let our potatoes roast and have a look at our cookies, because there's our timer. Oh, and look at that, perfect. So let's touch the timer to turn that off. And I just want you to see how evenly baked these cookies are, right? So right there, you can see how evenly cooked they are. Now, just see, they're just a tiny bit soft in the middle, but that's okay. They're going to keep cooking even as they cool, right? So we're going to set those off to the side. And now here's our bacon, right? Again, cooked simultaneously. Look how beautiful, nice, and just beautiful crispy. It's remarkable that they took the same amount of time. They don't always do that. Sometimes the bacon is done a little bit after, but in this case, it's done at the same amount of time, right? So there we go. We've got our bacon. We're going to set that over here next to the meatloaf. All right. So we've talked a little bit about the first of the still modes, right? The stone mode, a still mode. But there's some other modes, obviously, that are still modes that you're going to probably use very frequently. And on the most notable one of that would be the bake mode, because it's what we're always been most comfortable with. All of us are very comfortable with bake mode. I think we understand it. But when we use bake mode, we ought to understand that 90% of the heat in bake mode is coming from the floor of the oven, down at the bottom. So what does that mean for you as you use bake mode? What I would recommend that you never do is put something in rack position 1 or even rack position 2, because either one of those racks, because of the proximity to that hot hot element under the floor. If that item is even slightly delicate, it's likely to burn, right? So I would just avoid rack 1 and 2 completely. I would do all my baking in racks 3, 4, and 5. And the important thing to remember about bake mode is that you only cook on one tray at a time, always. You don't stack them because obviously the flow of heat is coming primarily from the bottom. If I stack the pans, I'm going to interrupt the heat flow, and now I'm going to get very different results depending on where it is in the oven. And you don't want to have to open the oven, spin the pan around, switch the racks. You don't want to do that. You want the oven to do that for you. That's what we have convection mode for. So bake mode is gentle, dry heat, right? So the other thing I like to coach with bake mode is that you don't add moisture to the oven, right? In bake mode, you're trying to take moisture out of the food to the exact amount that makes that food to the degree of doneness that you would like, right? So in bake mode, we don't use moisture in the oven. We don't add it ourselves. We're just essentially extracting moisture from whatever it is we're cooking. That's what we have to remember about bake mode. It's dry, it's one pan, and it's rack 3, 4, and 5. Now, why 3, 4, and 5 are important is because sometimes you might want a little more color on the top of what it is you're baking. So to take advantage of that 10% of heat from the broiler element, just move it up from rack 3 to rack 4 and maybe even to rack 5. You get a little more browning on the surface of whatever it is you're cooking, right? So bake mode, really take it literally. It's a baking mode. It's a single rack. It's gentle, even heat from below. So if you think about it, it's like blowing up a hot air balloon. All that heat comes from below. It inflates the balloon. Same idea with baking, a cake or something like that on a single rack. That's when we use bake mode for that. That's what we used for our granola. So we had that gentle heat coming up from below, up in rack position number 4. Worked really nicely to get a nice crispy brown granola, all right? Bake mode's cousin, also a still mode, is roast mode. Roast mode is nice, gentle heat, right? But many times I coach with roast mode is you're adding moisture to the oven cavity. So you're doing a pot roast. You're making some ossobuco. Maybe you're going to do a pork shoulder, a pulled pork, whatever it might be. That's when you want to use roast mode because the 75% of heat from below the floor gives you that simmering effect, right? So you can go lower in the oven. You can go down to 2. You can go down to 1 in your rack positions because you've got that moisture in the pan that's allowing stuff to simmer, to cook gently and evenly. And with all that extra moisture, it's going to keep it more tender and more succulent. So just kind of keep that in mind. With roast mode is those low and slow, right? Instead of putting it on the stove and simmering it, maybe you want to pop it into the oven and use roast mode to do that low, slow braise or that nice slow roast. That's what you want to use roast mode for. Do you need to cover the item? Well, I would cover it for the first 2/3 of the cooking time and then uncover it so that then that broiler at 25% gives you that little bit of caramelization, gives you that little bit of browning. That's extra flavor. That can't be a bad thing. So roast mode, great for low and slow, right? Not great for doing a turkey because you don't want to leave a turkey in the oven for 7.5 hours. I don't care what some of those recipes say. I don't think that's a good idea. So you want to use roast mode for those low, slow items like that really benefit from the moisture and that gets the good texture inside. It's not so much how they look. It's about the texture internally. And again, I've left off with the probe. You're going to use your probe a lot of times in roast mode, right? And so for everybody's oven, your probe is going to plug in right up here in this upper left-hand corner. That's where the insert point is right there in the upper left-hand corner. Once the probe is inserted and you choose whatever mode you're going to use, and you can use the probe in every mode except broil. You cannot broil with your probe in place, right? But if you choose any of the other modes, right? If I just choose, just regular old roast mode, set that time in, right? Now, if I want to change my probe temperature, I simply touch right here in the corner where it says probe temp. And now the probe pops up, and now I can change that temperature by typing in my goal temperature. Maybe I'm going to do 165 is my probe temperature. Now I can literally watch the probe count up while the oven is heating up, right? So That's how you program your probe, right? You're always going to see it on the touchscreen, whether it's on the panel on your dual fuel, whether it's on the touchscreen on your M or your E series. You're going to see it right there. All you have to do is touch the word probe, and then that screen is going to open up, and you're going to be able to program the alert temperature for your probe. Remember that once that alert temperature is achieved, the oven will not turn itself off. It's going to keep cooking. So it's just there to tell you, hey, we've reached the temperature you asked us to. Maybe it's time for you to take that item out of the oven. So just remember, it's not shutting your oven off. You can't program it to do that when it reaches the probe temperature. It's simply there to alert you that that probe temperature has been achieved. So keep that in mind. So again, roast mode is going to be something you're going to use that probe in, I think, fairly frequently, as well as in convection roast, and convection. Can also use it in bake as well. So the other two still modes that you may not use quite as frequently are going to be the modes warm and proof. Proof is obviously for allowing yeasted doughs to rise in a stable and warm environment. It only goes between 85 and 115 degrees, so you can simply pick any individual temperature between those two numbers, and then it'll just give you very gentle heat from below, creating a nice environment for allowing your dough to rise. If you want to create a little extra humidity in the oven cavity to allow your dough to rise in a moister environment, all you need to do is take an old cake pan, place it on rack position number 1, add a couple cups of boiling water, put a rack in position 2, place your dough in position number 2, and then allow it to rise with that additional humidity in the oven. It's a nice way to allow your dough to proof and to rise, all right? The other mode you get is warm. You have a warm mode, right? For allowing you to hold food, warm crockery and plates and things like that when you want to serve on it, or perhaps you'd like to re-warm food. I like to kind of coach that there's 3 temperatures that you need to kind of lock into your memory, right? You need the lowest temperature, 140 degrees, for when you would like to pre-warm plates and dishes and bowls and serving pieces to keep your food warmer at table for a longer period of time. So if you set your oven to warm 140, insert the plates in there, let them get nice and warm. They'll be fairly easy to handle. You can serve on them very quickly, and then they'll keep your food warm at the table. One of the other numbers I want you to keep in mind is 160 for items that you have just prepared, right? I just made a casserole, I just roasted a chicken. I need to hold that food so I can serve it in a nice warm manner in the next hour and a half, right? I want you to set your oven to warm 160. That way when you put the food in, it's going to hold it at a nice serving temperature, but it's not going to keep cooking it. Now remember that when you do cook something, right, if you've just roasted something, you bake something in the oven and you want to hold it at that temperature, you need to rest it out of the oven first before you put it into the oven. Don't immediately transfer from the very hot oven at 375 to 160 and think that that item is not going to keep cooking. It's going to keep cooking, so you need to take it out of the oven, allow it to rest on your countertop for, at least 10 minutes, maybe longer, depending on the size of that item. Then insert it into a 160-degree oven, and that will hold it at that even temperature so you still have a nice warm meal, but you haven't kept cooking it, because you don't want to double cook something for a long period of time. So that's 160. And then if you have to do some work in advance and you'd like to re-warm something without double cooking it, right? You can use the warm setting on your oven, set it 200 degrees. In this case, I would recommend that you use your temperature probe as well. Insert the temperature probe into whatever it is needs to be reheated, right? That was made in advance, chilled, and now needs to be reheated but not recooked, right? We want to re-warm that. We want to warm it at 200 degrees, cover it. If you want to keep extra moisture underneath there, make sure you cover it with plastic wrap first, then the aluminum foil. Put the probe through both into the food, plug the probe in, set your probe temperature to 150, your oven to warm 200, and then you can watch the middle of that food get warm over the time it's taking to rewarm. Now, is it fast? No, it's not fast, but you're not double cooking your food. And you really can't guarantee that you're not double cooking your food when you throw it in a microwave, right? And you certainly don't want to put it into an oven at another 350-degree temperature because that is double cooking it. So again, great way to rewarm is to use that double layered approach of the plastic and then the aluminum foil, probe in the center, 150 internal temperature for the probe, 200 for the oven in warm mode. Now you're not double cooking your food, and you should get a really nice, warm, moist, delightful meal out of that you've basically made in advance and want to rewarm it. You can't do it from like a frozen state, right? You can't take something and put it in the oven that's frozen and then heat it to that, because that's not going to be the same thing. You're going to get all sorts of extra moisture with that. So you're going to have to defrost it first before you do that. All right? So that's the warm mode in there. So now you also have, I'm going to pop over and just check my potatoes, right? See how they're doing. Oh, look at that. So you can see already how nice and brown they're getting. We're just going to give it, they're just about there. So I just think another couple of minutes and that's it. You can see how quickly that cooks. Sorry to throw you off there a little bit. All right. So broiling, right? When you use your broiler. Now the broiler obviously is going to be engaged at 100% when we are using the broiler, right? You're going to want to use that blue pan with the rack on it. Again, I like to line it with aluminum foil, put my food on there. I like to preheat my broiler. You don't have to, but I preheat my broiler 3-5 minutes max, right? That's about all you need to get your broiler nice and hot. Your broiler has slightly different settings than the rest of your oven. It only has 3 temperatures, high, medium, and low. When you are cooking something from the raw state to the cooked state, so, a piece of fish, a steak, a chicken breast, something you want to take from raw to cooked, I want you to use the highest heat setting. I want you to broil at that high setting, and the way you adjust for the different thicknesses is where you place the rack position. So again, highest heat setting, right, for some piece of protein or something like that that's at least 1 inch thick or thinner, rack positions 5 or 6, right? So a little bit closer to the broiler because it's a little thinner. You want to cook it quickly, get that nice brown on the outside, but still allow the inside to be nice, right? So just cook it, rack position 5 or 6 on the highest heat setting. If that item is thicker than 1 inch, then I recommend that you put it in rack position 5 or 4. It just depends on how much color you want on the outside. So 5 or 4 for 1 inch or thicker, 5 or 6 for 1 inch or thinner, and then it will cook very nicely, right? Always remember, too, that when you insert the broiler pan, just grip it by the handle, slide it straight onto the rack where you're going to do the broiling, and let it stop naturally. Then you've got that positioned in the center of the oven as it stops naturally against the back of the rack. You don't have to be looking around to gauge it. You just slide it in, hit the back wall or hit the back rail on the oven rack, and it's going to be perfectly centered, right? So again, preheat, that's really up to you. I always do. Using your rack position to adjust for the thickness of the item that's being cooked, right? And I only turn it one time. I just flip it once, right? Cook it on one side, turn it over, there you go. That's one of the nice things about having those extension glide racks. You can easily slide that rack out of the oven, turn the piece of protein over, and then slide it back in and cook it. So it really makes nice to have those glide racks up at the top, all right? The other 2 heat settings, medium and low, are going to be ideal heat settings for when you would like to brown the top of a casserole. Maybe you're glazing something, melting, toasting, all of those things. That's going to be what you're going to use those lower heat settings for. Not so much of cooking something through, but just embellishing something, garnishing something, finishing something off. That's what you use those heat settings for. So again, medium and low are for that. High is for doing the cooking when you broil. Again, door stays closed whole time. Always remember that. You don't need to prop the door open like we used to have to do that in the old days. Don't have to do that anymore. Okay? So, those are all the cooking modes in your oven, right? All the different ways you can cook. Again, download this Wolf Mode Convection Guide. If you need to remind yourself of what some of the best uses are for the different modes, you're going to find this is going to be really helpful for you. The other 2 documents that I provided there, the links for, one is an internal temperature guide. If you're unsure of how hot medium is on your rack of lamb, there's a guide for you. You can download this and use that to guide your probe temperatures as you're using your temperature probe in your oven. Just remember, too, with your probe, that you always want to make sure that the probe itself is inserted fully into the piece of protein that you are cooking. Do not leave the metal sticking out in the oven, because oftentimes the probe reads the oven before it finishes cooking the inside of the meat, and next thing you know, your rack of lamb cooked in 3.5 minutes because it read the probe, not the inside of the meat. So make sure that that probe is fully inserted into the food before we cook it. And then the last link you have on there, this is a little more hefty. If you would choose to, you can download a use and care guide for all Wolf, Sub-Zero, and Cove appliances. This was consolidated by us here at Roth, so you can put everything in a single volume, right? So if you need to know, how to change the filter on your Sub-Zero or clean the filter on your Cove dishwasher, all that stuff is here in one handy volume, along with all of your Wolf appliances separated by appliance category. So microwaves are together, ovens are together, ranges are together, so it's a nice thing to have. So download that should you choose to, and then you'll have that at the ready. Okay, let's go grab those potatoes out of the oven. There we go. All right. Look at that. Looks good. Grab my utensil. I like those onions just a little bit crispy there. But you can just see how beautiful and tender these are. So we're just going to give those a chance to rest. All right, so those are all the cooking modes in your oven. What about the cleaning mode? What about self-cleaning? You might have heard some things about running self-cleaning features in your oven and not to do it and all this kind of stuff. Nothing could be further from the truth. We want you to use that self-cleaning feature. We just want you to use it correctly. So the important thing to remember is that you can use your self-cleaning feature on your oven up to 5 times in a calendar year, right? Just 5 times, that's a lot, right? Because quite frankly, if you're running your cleaning cycle in July, that's a little crazy, but whatever. You could do that if you want, but remember that your oven is going to reach temperatures in excess of 750 degrees in that cleaning cycle. So your kitchen's going to get very hot, so I wouldn't recommend it doing on a very, very hot day, right? But you can do it up to 5 times a year. I find that I only need to do it maybe a couple times a year, and I certainly use my ovens a lot, right? Easy for me to decide when to. If I look into my oven and I look at the back wall of the oven, and if the back wall of the oven is a completely different color than the rest of the oven, in other words, has the back wall turned black, maybe it's time, because I don't want to clean that deeply into my oven. So you can use your cleaning cycle when that happens. Remember that a little bit of debris, a little bit of dirt on the walls of the oven are not going to impact the performance of the oven. It's not going to change the way the oven bakes and cooks, right? So up to 5 times a year, you want to make sure that everything comes out of the oven when you're going to run that self-cleaning cycle. All the racks, the side racks included, need to come out. Those side racks are very easily removed. They're just on little screws that are on keyhole attachments. You don't need a screwdriver. You don't need any tool. You just lift the rack up and remove it from the oven. Once the racks are out, you don't need to wipe out the interior of the oven. Just close the oven door, press the clean cycle, press start. The door will lock automatically, and the oven will run its cycle. That cycle takes about 4 hours. Now remember, if your oven wasn't that dirty, but you decided to clean it anyway, you can stop the cycle by simply turning the oven off. Whether it's on the front panel, you would just select up or off if it were running a clean cycle. If you're on your M series oven and you have the knobs on the Pro, you would just turn the dial to off, and that will cancel the cleaning cycle at that point. The door will stay locked until the oven determines it is safe to open the door, and that at that point in time you can open the door and reinsert the racks. I can tell you right now, I have almost never ever had to wipe out the inside of the oven after a cleaning cycle, right? So I've really found that you've never had to do that. I don't know where all the dirt goes, but it's not there when it's done. So that's the best way to run the cleaning cycle. Just use it judiciously. Be very mindful about how often you use it. You don't want to abuse it, because it could, over time, if you use it too frequently, might not be good for the oven. But we're not building you an appliance that's basically designed to fail here. We really want it to stay, we want it to last for 20 years. That's why we design everything that way. So we're not going to give you a cycle that's going to shorten that lifespan. So use your cleaning cycle when it's really bad inside. That's just the way I do it. If you need to know some ways, I'm about to show you how you can clean those spot cleaning items in just a second. So let's just plate some of this stuff up. We'll take our meatloaf that came out in the gourmet mode, right? And you're all wondering perhaps, what is the gourmet mode and why would I want to use the gourmet mode? Well, the gourmet mode is the mode that basically is, you know what, I don't know exactly how I want to cook this. Maybe my oven has a way to do it. Well, it does, and the gourmet mode has about 50 plus programs in there that literally will walk you through step by step to prepare different items. So in the case of this meatloaf, I simply touched gourmet, then I touched on the touchscreen meat, beef, and then I scrolled over to where I found meatloaf. Once I touch meatloaf, I hit done, and now the oven walks me through exactly what I need to do to cook the meatloaf in the oven. First, it tells me no preheating is required. So you don't have to turn the oven on in advance. If your meatloaf is ready, you can just go right ahead, put it in the oven. It also says place a rack in position number 2. And it'll always tell you what rack position you need to place the food in, right? Then it will tell you, if you're using the temperature probe, where to insert the probe in that particular item. I put it from the top down into the center of the meatloaf, and then it tells you exactly how it plans to cook that particular item. In this case, it did roast mode at 450 degrees for 20 minutes, right? Then it automatically lowered the temperature to 325 degrees. It set my probe temperature to 165, and it cooked it until it reached that internal temperature. So it literally walks you through every single step. In some cases, if you're not using the probe, you're going to have to set a timer based on your recipe. And this is mostly true of the baked goods in the gourmet mode, that it can't know how long your cookies are going to take versus my cookies. So it's going to want you to set your own timer, right, so that you can pull those cookies out at the appropriate time. But what it will do is tell you, here's the appropriate rack position for either 1 tray, 2 trays, 3 trays, and then it will adjust the temperature accordingly, and you'll just have to set a timer. Generally speaking, I think what you should do is just set the timer as the recipe instructed in the beginning, and then you'll be just fine with the gourmet settings when you do baked goods. But again, that gourmet feature is really nice when you're just either a little unsure how you might want to cook it, or you're just not feeling like thinking that much and you're kind of hopeful that the oven will do it for you. It really does do a great job with that. So use that gourmet feature, not just when you don't know exactly how you want to prepare something, but perhaps, just the next time you do something, you want to try it out and see how the gourmet feature does for you. I think that's going to be a really great way to utilize. So we're going to take some of our bacon and put it on here too, because come on, you can't have meatloaf without a little bacon across the top, right? So there we go. All right. Okay. So let me talk a little bit about some of these extra cleaning supplies that we have here that we might want to use while we're to take care of our appliance. So if you catch a stain early, right? In other words, your pie boils over in the oven, you get a little stain on the floor of the oven. If you catch it quickly, like the same day, you can use a barkeeper's friend, right, to scrub that stain off the floor of your oven, provided you're only going to use either a blue or pink Scotch-Brite. You could also use the Scrub Daddy, which is the yellow smiley-faced one, or if you'd like, you can use a magic eraser. That'll work really nicely as well. But if you catch it early with those 3 things, you might be able to get that stain off without too much trouble if you catch it quickly. It's those stains that get cooked on over time, right? You have that pie boil over, and then all of a sudden, you had to roast a chicken, and you had to do this and you do that, and so all of a sudden you don't, it's really cooked that stain on. You can use this product. It's called Carbon Off. You're going to need to order it. It's a restaurant product. It's a commercial product, but you can order it online. And take some of that and an old paintbrush, brush it directly on the stain that you want to remove. Let it sit overnight. The oven doesn't need to be hot. It actually probably should be cold, but brush it on, let it sit overnight. Following morning, put on your rubber gloves, go in, take a nice rag or maybe your blue Scotch-Brite, give that stain a quick scrub. That stain should come right off. If it's cooked on really badly, you know, it's been months and months and months, you might have to apply it twice, but that's rare. But this will take it off. It's nice because you can direct the application onto the spot. You don't need to spray the whole cavity. So just use that for those spot cleaning moments. Know as well, it's not going to damage the finish on any of your appliances, right? Your stainless, your porcelain enamel, the racks, doesn't matter. If you get it on there, it's not going to hurt it, so don't worry about that. But it really does work great. The other product I love to recommend to people is for cleaning their oven racks. This Carbona 2-in-1 oven and grill rack cleaner. It's really nice if you have racks that have gotten like a lot of cooked on grease and dirt, kind of changed color a little bit. They're not that beautiful chromed finished anymore. You want to get them clean. You can use this product instead of scrubbing each individual tine of the oven rack. Just take the racks, you're going to place them into a bag, a giant bag. Now, if you have an E-series oven, the bag that comes with the kit, you can fit your racks in. But if you have an M-series or a dual fuel or an induction range oven, you're going to need to get a couple of trash bags and double bag the trash bags, put the racks in, empty the contents of the bottle that's in the box into the bag, seal it, and then get your partner to hold the other end and just kind of spin them around like this. Just flip them so you're coating the racks with the solution. Then lay them on a horizontal surface, let them sit overnight, and the following morning, get up in the morning, take the bag to the sink, gently open it so that it drains into the sink, and then just spray the racks with the faucet sprayer and maybe take a nylon bristled brush and just coax away all that accumulated grease and dirt. It's just going to wash down the drain. So it's a really great way to keep your oven racks looking really, really good. You don't need to do this more than once a year. Again, a little bit of that built up grease and dirt on your oven racks is not going to impact the way the oven performs. It's just the way it looks. If you want to clean it more often than that, that's certainly up to you. But I find once a year is plenty for doing the oven racks, and that stuff works really, really well. People ask me very, very frequently, how do I clean the interior of my oven glass, right? You don't want to run a self-cleaning cycle just to clean the oven glass. Well, you don't need to. You've got a couple of choices here. You want to do the mechanical method, right? And that means, do I want to use a little more elbow grease? I can use my Barkeeper's Friend, a blue Scotch-Brite, and a paint scraper, a razor blade, like this. Make a little paste with the Barkeeper's Friend right on the inside of the oven glass door. Wipe that on there, scrape in a singular direction across, and then bottom to top. Scrape all that grease and accumulated dirt off so it's in a right angle. Wipe that away. Wipe it down with a clean, wet cloth, and then when you're done, come back with an ammonia-free glass cleaner. Give it a spray, give it a wipe with a microfiber. Looks fantastic. If you don't want to do the mechanical method because you're a little nervous, you might scratch the glass. I completely understand. You can use the magic eraser and a good commercial degreasing solution. So any good commercial degreaser, 409, Fantastic, Simple Green, Fabuloso, any good degreasing solution, magic eraser, wipe down that interior glass will work really nicely for getting the grease and grime off the inside of your glass without scraping it with the razor blade. And then last but not least, for cleaning, and this is great for the exterior, right? A lot of people wonder, like, how do I keep my appliances just looking fantastic on the outside without having to use a glass cleaner on the touch screen and some of the glass components of the door and maybe the stainless steel? Here's the solution. This product it's a Pledge product. It's called Lemon Enhancing Polish. It has no wax in it. It's just an enhancing polish. But all you need to do is get your microfiber cloth, spray the cloth. Don't spray the appliance. Spray the cloth, and then you can come back. You can wipe from stainless right onto the glass. It leaves no residue, no fingerprints, nothing. So it's a great way to just do everything on the exterior, whether it's your Wolf appliance, it's your Sub-Zero, it's your Cove dishwasher. It's a great way to clean everything at once without having to transition from one product to the next product to the next product. I really do recommend you using this to keep your appliances looking fantastic. Doesn't leave any smudges, any fingerprints. It's really a nice way to keep everything super clean. So that's going to really help with that. So again, questions about your appliances, about the use and care of any Sub-Zero, Cove, or Wolf appliance, you can always come back here to the Culinary Scene, or you can visit our Roth Living YouTube channel. Keep an eye out as well for the relaunch of the Roth Living website, which will have an upgraded and updated version of the Culinary Scene with hundreds of hours of video content covering all the use and care of your Sub-Zero, Wolf, and Cove appliances. And then we'll certainly look forward to having you back at another one of these live stream sessions here from the Culinary Scene. So without further ado, I want to wish everybody a very pleasant Friday evening and a lovely weekend, and we'll see you again here in the kitchen really soon.